Welcome to the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. This is a replay of one of our most popular episodes. At the time of our interview in 2018, Corie was the CFO of Best Buy. The following summer, she was promoted to CEO and continues to hold that position today. As you'll hear, Corie's answers are always so well thought out, and she is super engaging. I appreciated how open and authentic she was during the interview, and there are a lot of great nuggets on overcoming adversity and becoming a leader. Enjoy. Hey, Corie, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we jump right in? You know, obviously a position you're at now as CFO of Best Buy. I assume early on in your life, in childhood, you must have had parents then that they themselves, either your mother or your father, were CEO of a major corporation, and you're just kind of following in their footsteps.
Absolutely not. I grew up in small town Minnesota. Cambridge is about an hour north of the Twin Cities. And I actually grew up about 10 miles outside of town, so 5 acres, middle of cornfields. My parents were actually divorced at a very young age for me at about 3, and then my dad remarried. And my dad and my stepmom were self-employed artists. And my mom was in ceramics, my dad was in leatherwork. And we traveled the country, schlepping our wares, literally boxes full in this conversion van. And we would drive and we would start setting up at 5 in the morning. We would take stuff down at 10 o'clock at night and work all day. And it was a fascinating lifestyle in terms of broadening my perspectives on the world, especially coming from a small town, Minnesota.
Right.
But it was also a very, I'll use organic as the word, meaning you never knew exactly what you would be doing. You never knew how much money you were going to make or where the money was going to come from. They did what they loved, certainly. But for someone who, from day one, like me, loves structure, loves standardized tests, loves, being the best in the class, it was a really hard way to grow up. And I think, when people ask me, how'd you end up doing what you did? I think it's because I so craved a life that was almost the antithesis of my parents' life, that every ounce of my energy went into figuring out how I could have this more kind of structured life. Luckily, they supported me in that, but it couldn't have been more different than my dad, the hippie, who came back from being drafted in Vietnam and was protesting across the U.S. I mean, here's the guy who, growing up, literally would say, you can't go work for the man. And, now
you're the
I
man.
am the man.
You're the man.
Yeah.
For a lot of people now, when they think about even going to college and things like that, the cost of it, even from when we were in college, is just insane of how much that has been. I assume you were pretty successful in high school and you were, driven in that way, but thinking, did you think you'd be able to go to college, or what were you thinking?
It's interesting. While I knew my family had no money, I mean, we had free lunches. I had the white ticket. Everyone else had the yellow ticket. Like, I knew we had no money. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't go to college. Now, the question was, how would I get there? And one of the things that became very apparent to me early on is that I needed to literally dominate in school and have the best grades and stand out in every way that I could, play every sport, volunteer. I started working when I was 13 and just decided that my portfolio would be so rich and so good that I could get the scholarships, the grants. Almost uniquely, I knew my parents were almost so poor that it would put me to the front of the line for some of the opportunities that existed. And so I just decided I was going to invest every ounce of my energy into getting there. And it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't. And part of that, I think, comes straight from my dad. My dad, from day one, has been my biggest fan. And always pushed gently, but genuinely made me believe I could do and be anything I wanted, which sounds cliche, but requires, I think, from a father-daughter relationship, the strength that a dad's support and love can build is, bar none, I would argue in my case certainly, one of the most important building blocks. And so it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't go. The question was just how hard would I have to work to get there? And, therefore in high school, I was much more dedicated to my studies and the results of my efforts likely than some of my peers. The other thing that became interesting for me in high school, my stepmom got sick and was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my little sister was born, my half-sister, when I was 16. And so the prioritization of my life really changed. I mean, I was up doing bottles and diapers in the middle of the night because my mom was trying to recover from chemo. And so this idea of how much can you have on your plate at once, how many plates can you have spinning, and how you stay really focused on where you spend your time and energy. I wouldn't have articulated it like that then,
Right.
but you just started to learn how to do it. And I think those are some skills that when I look back now, those are the kind of skills that fundamentally get you to where you're going. Trust me, at that point, I had no inclination it was going to be corporate America. I went to college to become first I thought marine biologist, then I thought mechanical engineer, and then I ended up an accountant, so whatever.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so we do have a connection there because you went to St. Ben's and I went to St. John's.
Yeah.
What was your experience there? And are there any values or things that you picked up from that experience that really carries on for you now?
Yeah, I never would have thought that I would go to St. Ben's. So let's start there. I was pretty sure I was going to go to St. Thomas, which, another good Catholic liberal arts school. But I walked on to the campus of St. Ben's, and there was something so unique about an all-women's campus. Yes, we had a partner school that was all men, and classes were all co-ed. But this idea that I would be surrounded by women and that they encouraged an all-women's leadership board, they encouraged all-women's curriculum, that was a pretty unique thing for me. And so, first of all, I decided, okay, I'm going to roll the dice here. I'm not Catholic, by the way, and church bells are ringing, nuns are walking around, and I was like, this is the antithesis. Again, I grew up with artists as parents. Like, this is not my life. And but this idea, and a few things really resonated for me. One, I am a big believer in a liberal arts education.
I was going to ask that because growing up myself, we didn't have a lot of money. And wanting to go to St. John's, one of the things that my dad said was, well, what do you get with a liberal arts education?
Right.
Right? I mean, like, I'd rather you had a trade. I'd rather, I guess maybe you could call it accounting, but, anything that when you get done, you have a specific skill that was marketable.
Right.
And the knock, at least from his perspective, was, what skill could you have when you get done with liberal arts? What would you say to that?
It's so interesting because you end up with a breadth of skills. And I think you would say this too. What you realize as you get further into your career is it becomes less and less specialized and more generalized. And you spend more time writing and speaking and thinking deeply about complex problems and motivating people. These are skills that you have to work across disciplines, I think, to really understand. And they are the things that St. Ben's and St. John's really lifted up. And I knew enough coming out of high school that I was in search of breadth versus extreme depth. I also knew I really wanted hands-on attention. And I wanted to be in classes that were 15 to 20 people with a prof I really respected and would spend some time on me versus being in classes of 1,000 where it was going to take me that much more effort to stand out. That idea of real personalized attention around kind of the holistic thinking process was exceptionally valuable. And so I took on also everything I could. So the other advantage of paying for your own education is you're not going to waste a minute. And I double majored, I took honors classes, I worked on campus, played rugby. So I wasn't that big of a nerd. Like I actually got out
Right.
But that concept of milking every ounce, and I call it now demanding return on your personal investment. And this idea of if I'm going to invest all of this energy, I am sure as heck going to walk out of here with big return on it.
What's interesting to me now is I think as parents, we try to give so much to our kids or every advantage that maybe we felt like we didn't have. Do you think that if you had every advantage, that would have hurt you in the end?
And I'm sure you watched this too. I watched a lot of young women at St. Ben's who had every advantage, all the money, they had cars, they had plenty of money to buy any kind of food they wanted. And I watched, not all of them certainly, but definitely many of them struggle with how do I make this important? What do I really want to do? It was a very different experience. And it is one of the things that keeps me up at night having kids. This idea of how I balance giving them the best opportunities I can, but at the same time, trying to instill in them a healthy respect for how you earn money and why it matters that you learn about the world and why it matters that you apply yourself. Otherwise, I worry they just feel like you wake up and things just appear in your house.
Yeah, right.
And both my husband and I, my husband came from a family of 6, lost his dad really young. He grew up in a small town in Nebraska. We came from super meager beginnings. And it is something we spend a disproportionate amount of our time talking about, is how do you instill that so that you do your best to help steer them along on a path where they have respect for not just their lives, but other lives in the world that don't look like theirs.
So when you get done with college, you start as an accountant. Is that the deal?
Yeah. So I majored in accounting and business management, and I graduated with a 3.99. I got 1 A- on a group project that to this day still irritates me.
Did you have a conversation with that professor
If
afterwards?
that says anything. And I was lucky in that at that point, when I graduated, the job market was fantastic. It was 97. And in accounting in particular, the big 5 firms were hiring right out of college. I had a job when I was a junior in college. And so I started at Deloitte & Touche, and I started in audit. And audit work is an excellent beginning in terms of breadth. I mean, you're in with CFOs of large companies as a new start. You start with 40 other people your age, which is a blast, but you work a lot and you travel a lot, and you tend to get shoved into like a broom closet on the 42nd floor where no one can see you, and no one really wants to talk to you because you're an auditor. And I knew I could be good at it, but my heart was not in it. And I felt like if I'm going to put in this kind of effort, sure as heck would like to be somewhere where I can, again, see that return on that personal investment. And I did that for a few years, and then started to look around for something that would be different, and literally stumbled on Best Buy. I mean, it wasn't like I liked consumer electronics. It wasn't like I liked retail. I mean, I liked shopping, but I interviewed with a woman named Ann Lowry, and Ann, I thought, was an exceptional female role model, which I hadn't met as many of in public accounting. And I thought I could learn from her. And the job she was offering was also really interesting. It was going to be the first finance job at Best Buy, not accounting, finance. And it was project-based. And I was like, this all sounds amazing. And so I just decided it was time for me to try something different, and at least for the first time, try to follow my heart. And like everyone, I was like, oh, I'll be there 2-3 years, and then I'll go do the next thing. But Anne turned out to be a real formative, more than a mentor, a sponsor in my life.
Explain what you mean by sponsor.
Yeah, I have a very strong personal point of view about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship.
Okay.
A mentor is there to help you think differently about your own development. And I think when done really well, they're going to ask you interesting questions. They're going to help provide some of the bumpers around how to think about steps you might want to take in order to improve your own development. A sponsor is the person who's going to advocate for you when the door is closed. And that's my best mental model on it. There's someone who knows your work well enough to actually be able to articulate what it is you bring to the table. They're going to likely push you, but they are also going to, when nobody is looking, advocate for you. And I think it's really important for you to have both. I actually believe the sponsor is fundamentally, especially in corporate America, more important for you than anyone, because there are a lot of conversations that happen about talent behind closed doors, and you need to have someone that you know has your back. Secondarily, also in corporate America, you need someone who's going to push you occasionally to take risks or put yourself out there in a way that you might not otherwise. I certainly believe, I will say this as the overgeneralization of the day, and I'm sure we'll get more into this, as a woman in corporate America, you tend to not be as wired to put yourself out there proactively. And you tend to think, if I just keep doing great work, someone's going to notice. And unfortunately, that is actually not always the case. And that's where the sponsor, I think, plays a really crucial role.
So she was your sponsor. I would assume by the same token, it's important to you to be someone else's sponsor. So do you have a person or a number of people that are in that role?
I try to have a number of people. You also can't be everybody's sponsor because there has to be some differentiation. But I am very clear about where I see the high potential talent in my organization or frankly in other organizations. And I am careful to find ways to both lift that talent up to others and then put that talent into situations that I think will genuinely stretch them. And that's not always easy, but the reward of watching people that you know can do amazing work is a big part of what inspires me now.
Did your sponsor put into your head you could be part of the leadership of this organization?
Yeah. At multiple points, multiple sponsors have done that. You know, I've had an interesting road at Best Buy. I interviewed twice to become an officer of the company really early in my career and was in fact kind of pushed into it probably too early. And when you interview to become an officer, they put you through a leadership assessment. So they have an outside firm come in, psychologist. They're going to sit down with you for 4 hours, and they're going to do what you're doing to me. They're going to make you walk through your life. Yeah. But you're much more enjoyable.
And I can't offer you a job. I'm sorry.
Darn. So what comes out of that is a leadership assessment. And in my first leadership assessment, not only did they say I had a number of things that I need to work on in terms of my development, actually written on paper is I am a risk to the organization. I still have the assessment. It's in my office. Wow. I keep it and refer to it occasionally. You know, I don't care who you are. That's a tough blow to the ego. My second assessment, while it didn't say I was a risk to the organization, it definitely said I would not recommend for hiring. And I think that, you know, you have a couple responses there.
I was going to say, did it shake you at all? Like
fight or flight.
Okay,
I mean,
it
really shakes you.
Yeah.
But I took the fight and I decided I really put a lot of energy into my development and who I wanted to be as a leader. And the other thing that became impactful then at that point in my career is that when the next opportunity came out, I actually wasn't going to put my name in because to your point, at that point, my ego was rattled. I was pregnant. I was like, let me just have this baby and I'll deal with it later.
Right.
And specifically, one of my sponsors at the time called me and said, you are insane if you do not put your name in for this job. And didn't just say that, but said, and here are the 5 reasons why. Here are the 5 things that I don't think you see in yourself that genuinely differentiate you from the rest of the population. That is what a sponsor does.
Wow.
And it's more than just saying you should go apply for this job, which that's more like what a mentor might do. The sponsor is like, no, let me help you think through what it is that differentiates you from other people. And I never, ever would have tried for that job.
Now that you mentioned the sponsor idea, how often do people ever get that feedback?
Yeah, it's a funny thing.
You know?
And I do think it's rare, but that's why I think nurturing the sponsor idea becomes really important and saying it out loud. Like if I look across the spectrum of people, whatever industry you work in, who are there to support me, where's the support and the mentorship? But then who are the people? And I know a lot of people who are self-employed who have what they would call a personal board of directors, right?
Right. Yep.
And they're trying to find that group of people that collectively are going to help them make the best decisions, but also push them. And I think in my experience, those leaders that are most adamant about getting that outside in input are the ones that I've seen kind of jump the curb more than others. Because left to our own devices, we're all going to get inside our own heads a little too much.
Right.
And I think we all need some of that perspective changing. And so to your point, I try very hard to do it for a large quantity of people at Best Buy. And it doesn't mean I'm always right. And I'm always clear to tell them this is just my point of view and my opinion.
Right.
But at least it's another voice outside your head.
So you mentioned this process of personal growth and developing your own leadership style. How would you categorize your method or your style of leadership?
I think it's one of the hardest questions.
Does it vary on who you're talking to, or is there a general arc to everything?
Here's what I will tell you. I don't believe it varies based on who I'm talking to. And I say that very purposefully.
Okay.
In my estimation, the leaders I've watched get in the most trouble are those who somehow try to be something they're not. And, you know, we've gone through a lot of changes at Best Buy now I've been there 19 years almost. We've had 4 CEOs in that time. We've had 4 CFOs in that time. And as you can imagine, every one of those leaders brings a slightly different color and leadership style. The leaders in the organization that I've watched try to change with every single new CEO or CFO are the ones who've struggled the most because they're not true to who they are. And I believe that internal conflict, if there's too much conflict between the person you are and the leader you are going to fail, or you're just flat out going to wear yourself out. That friction in your soul is more, I think, than you can take. And so the leader I've become is very much a reflection of the person I am. And if at any point it doesn't work for the organization, then I'm probably at the wrong organization. And I've had to say that out loud a couple times too. And my leadership style is, we spend a lot of time at Best Buy talking about our purpose. Hubert, our CEO, is very focused on purpose-driven leadership.
Okay.
And so he drags all of us as an executive team through talking about our purpose. Okay. And he loves to do this. And as you can imagine, as corporate leaders, none of us are like, holding hands. And
so I think it's part of that hard in that I think people maybe are reflective and give thought about their purpose, but they haven't had to walk down the street and tell people what it is.
That's it. I mean, really think for a second and in your head, think about if someone were to just put you on the spot and say, what is your purpose? And it was asked in a work vein, but you realize quickly your purpose stretches between your personal and professional. And the real articulation of your purpose is quite difficult. And I spent a great deal of time thinking about, in the moments where I feel like I'm making the most difference, what does that look like for me? And my purpose, whether it's professional or personal, is very much about stewardship. I feel like I'm succeeding when I leave something better than when I found it. And for me, what drives me, it's not a title, it's not the money, genuinely. It is this idea that every day I can leave and understand how I left something a little bit better than when I found it. And it's why I'm on the board of St. Ben's, the board of trustees, because I love this liberal arts education idea so much that I want to help shape it. I love, Best Buy and this idea that there's 120,000 employees who have jobs because we're a successful company. And the more successful we are, the more people who get opportunities. That idea of stewardship and being able to say that out loud is really important because then for me, it makes my focus each day that much easier. But the articulation of it is, I think, quite difficult.
One of the things I was thinking about, if you have a room full of your leadership and you're all describing your purpose, is the thought behind articulating your purpose so that as an organization, they can put you in a place to fulfill your purpose? Is that the main reason?
That is part of it, certainly. The second part of it is understanding why others work is also very useful in interacting with them. So I'll give a specific example. One of my peers was very clear in saying his purpose is to drive Best Buy to grow. He believes in growth, and that's his purpose. And he will put his family secondary to driving this company to grow, which takes a lot of courage to say out loud. Mm-hmm. But that is his purpose. And it for me, it explained so much about why he acts the way he does, why he structures work the way he does, why he prioritizes the way he does. And it allows me more room to think about how I would work with him. One of the things that we've done recently at Best Buy is we've rebranded, and we've done it in a way that started with our employees. We said, who are we on our best days? And we came up with a series of guiding behaviors. And one of the guiding behaviors is be human. Mm-hmm. And I think what we believe strongly as an organization is the more human leaders can be, the more they can describe who they are and why they work the way they do, we think you get more velocity in the organization and ability to work together well by being human and approachable.
Hold that thought. We're going to take a break here. And when we come back, I want to expand on that topic. Hey there, this is Joe. You know me as the host of this podcast, but did you know that I'm also the co-founder and president of Moxie Wealth Management, a boutique wealth management firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota? My team and I excel at taking complex family and business planning concepts and making our financial advice easy to understand. We recognize the trust that executives and families place in our team and value our role in helping our clients be intentional with their assets. When you partner with Moxie, my team and I focus on creating a plan that encompasses your financial goals and philanthropy, while also understanding how you want your wealth to impact your family and future generations. You can trust our unique expertise to build a thoughtful yet strategic wealth and legacy plan for your future. To learn more about me and my firm, send me an email at joe@moxiewealth.com That's Joe at Moxie wealth.com. I'm a registered representative and investment advisor representative of Securian Financial Services, Inc., securities and investment advisory services offered through Securian Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. North Star Resource Group is independently owned and operated. Moxie Wealth Management is affiliated with North Star Resource Group. Welcome back. We were talking about being human. With such a large organization, it seems like that would be a monumental task.
It is, except we're all people. And even so, yesterday we had what we call a fireside chat. Hubert and I get up on stage, and our head of PR, Matt Furman, moderates a discussion. Mm-hmm. And we always have it right after earnings, so we can describe what happened on the earnings call. In the history of Best Buy, this has looked different at different times, right? It started with a CFO and CEO standing awkwardly on stage, like reciting pre-written lines about what happened. Yeah. It's evolved into genuinely what is a fireside chat. We have a little fire. We have these big oversized chairs that I hate because I can't sit in them without looking awkward. And it is a very, Hubert is lovely because he allows us to have very much a banter between the two of us. He allows me to pop in little jokes. We try to portray ourselves as people and as humans. I mean, one of the questions on stage was, look, you just wrote an $800 million check to acquire a company, Corie. It is the largest acquisition in the history of Best Buy. You know, what does that feel like? What's the process? You could take that a couple different ways. I took it. Here's what that looked like, guys. I went home. I sat my 12-year-old, my 8-year-old down at the table, and I said, guess what Mom did today? I wrote almost $1 billion check. And, you know, their eyes were as big as saucers. They can't even, does not compute for a kid, right? But how you frame, like, the reality of the world to us as well. We're just people. We go home every day. I'm trying to think about how to make the pork chops as tasty as possible. Right. Like, this is just life. And I think using every one of those moments that you can to really be human. And you asked about my leadership style. Vulnerability for me is a big part of my leadership style. And I believe strongly in this idea of kind of putting myself out there, which can be scary. But I fundamentally believe you get more juice out of being real than you're going to get by people seeing you as kind of a robotic, stoic leader. And I think this is a little bit about the evolution of corporate America on the whole, to be honest with you. You're seeing more CEOs engage in ethical debate and moral debate. And that is not something you ever would have seen 50 years ago. Right. And so I think there's a little bit of this evolution of what it means to be a good corporate citizen and a corporate leader that looks quite different than it used to.
So speaking of evolution, the fact that you're a woman as CFO.
Yeah, it's kind of a different deal.
Yeah. And we've talked a little in the past. You have an idea of how many CFOs there are in Fortune 500?
Yeah, there are 71 CFOs in the Fortune 500. So it's about 12%, and it hasn't moved from 12% for about 15 years. And this is an interesting question because I think you can either look at this as incredibly isolating or incredibly invigorating and powerful. I mean, we'll go on the road next week, Hubert and I will, and we'll go to the Morgan Stanley conference in New York, and then we'll go to Boston. We'll see probably 120 potential investors during that time. And I keep a count because I'm just curious. Of the 120, my inclination is likely between 6 and 8 will be women. And of the 6 and 8, likely 2 will speak at any given point in the meetings. And those can be hard, long days. There can be 20 men in suits sitting across the table from me. And what I decided early on is that I find great power in that. I'm like a unicorn. I mean, there's something so different that I bring to the table. And you would find if you were to follow me, I'll actually play that up. I will wear the most feminine things that I can find. And very different from even my predecessor or how other people would choose to do the role. But I like to be different. And I like the idea that there's something I bring to the table that nobody across the table can bring in the same way.
And of those 71 CFOs, I would suspect most of them don't have young kids.
Yeah, that's the other delineating factor. And it's, again, when you decide, in my case, what it is that's really important to you to convey, the idea of a working mom with young kids is a really important point for me to try to convey. Because it's all I know, right? It's my angle.
Right.
But I want other people to feel like you can cross that bridge when it's time to have kids and keep going. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the hardest experiences of my life when I was pregnant with my son, so this would have been 13 years ago, I was working a really tough job. I was in enterprise financial planning, which is like a grind. Mm-hmm. And my boss, I remember I sat down with him because I was super sick with my son and mornings were really hard. And I wanted him to just know, like, I'm trying my best, but this is a slog. And I sat down with him and I said, you know, I'm pregnant. And this is like the second person I've told, right? My husband knows, mm-hmm. a couple members of my family know. Mm-hmm. And his reaction, he looked me in the eye and he said, oh, and I had such big plans for you. Wow. And first of all, knowing what I know now, if I'd had my HR hat on, I'd have like done a whole bunch of things differently. Right. But it was so crushing to me and defeating. And I didn't know what to do with it. And frankly, I wasn't even sure who to tell because at that point at Best Buy, there were no women in leadership. Right. I didn't have role models that I could go talk to about it. And so if someone says something like that to you and you can't see anyone else who's ever done anything differently, that can be the stopping point, period, end of story. Mm-hmm. No matter how many articles you read, it doesn't, your perception is what's around you. Mm-hmm. And so what I eventually vowed once I kind of got myself back together was being overt about being a mom was really important to me.
Don't hide from it.
And in fact, lift it up every chance. And so, you know, when Mother's Day came at Best Buy, they came in and did a long video and I actually had my kids come into the office and wanted them to talk a little bit about what it's like to have mom miss baseball games sometimes. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I feel strongly about is never apologizing to my kids for the job I have. You can it's really easy when you're getting on the plane to go to New York and you're going to miss 2 days of home life. It is so easy to just say, I'm sorry, I have to get on the plane. I'm sorry, I'm going to be gone for 2 days. And I just committed to never saying I'm sorry and instead saying, I get the chance to go to New York because of this amazing job that I have. Mm-hmm. And I promise I will FaceTime you and I will catch New York specific Pokemon and I will bring all that back to you. Mm-hmm. And that lens change for me was really important.
So you try to control the concept of never being happy where you are in a sense of if I'm at work, I wish I was at home. If I was at home, I wish I was at work, you know, that kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, you nailed it. And it is the easiest spiral to get into. And it doesn't mean I've nailed it. The single question I certainly get the most any speaking engagement I ever do is talk to me about work-life balance. Mm-hmm. It's a fallacy. It just is. And it's only what you can make it. You are the only person who's going to make you happy in this. And if you can't decide what your own personal borders are or what is important to you, no one else is going to decide for you. I always say, especially in corporate America, a Fortune 100 company will take all you want to give it.
Right.
Every ounce you want to work, they'll let you work.
You know, I was listening to somebody else that was like a Silicon Valley company where we serve breakfast, we serve lunch, we serve dinner, we do all these things. And, you know, the response was, that just means you be at work for 12 hours a day, mm-hmm. you know, because we can provide your whole life for you.
Yeah,
you know,
we have 2 Caribous, we have a daycare,
right.
We have a workout facility, you can get your dry cleaning done, I get my shoes fixed.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. A company will set up a structure that will allow you to give everything you can. You're the only one who's going to decide what does that look like for you. And for me, some days, does that mean I work on a Saturday? Yep, absolutely. I'm in retail. All of our associates are working all weekend, so that's life. Like my family, I haven't celebrated Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day for 15 years because our stores are open. It's Black Friday. I'll be up all night long. But we have Thanksgiving on Saturday and everybody knows it and they're cool with it. It's just this question of how you decide what's important to you, but then you have to stick to it because that's actually the harder part. And I remember we had an executive offsite one day. It was the first day of school, Jackson's first day, my daughter's first day of kindergarten. And an executive offsite you only have probably twice a year. And I just wrote a note to my peers and said, I'm going to be 2 hours late. I'm going to the first day of kindergarten. If anybody has any major issues with that, please let me know. And you can imagine all you got was lovely supportive notes back.
Yeah, directly.
But it took a lot of courage
Right.
to just put that out there and say, that is my priority for today.
So one of the things we've talked about before is that one of the changes in taking this position is that you feel like you're always on stage. Mm-hmm. And what I'm curious about, because I always talk about leaders of different organizations, whether or not they're an extrovert or an introvert. And so you're on stage all the time. Is that something you love to do?
I hate it. Hate it. And it takes all of my emotional energy. I am an introvert. And the true definition of an introvert means you get your energy from being alone. Therefore, I can be capable on stage, but it takes me disproportionate energy to get there. And it's funny. I mean, you go into finance because you love spreadsheets. Like, you love sitting alone and cranking out complex VLOOKUPs, and that's what you do. And then at some point, when you get far enough, you realize they won't even allow me access to our spreadsheets anymore because I'll mess something up.
Got it.
And all of my time is either in one-on-one conversations, meeting situations, or large-scale presentations and stages. And it is, I think for me, it will always be hard. Mm-hmm. And every time it takes me energy. I do more prepping than most people. I spend time getting feedback from others on how I'm doing it. It's incredibly difficult and it's exhausting. The hardest days for me, like next week when we go to New York, mm-hmm. and I will be on that kind of stage, I will have 15 to 20 meetings in a day, including a breakfast and a dinner. For me to come down from that will be like 2 days of exhaustion.
Okay.
And back to the initial question, though, that we were wrestling with around kind of a liberal arts education, you realize the real skills you need to be a public speaker or to convey your points eloquently, whether written or verbal, is a very different skill set. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how many of those type of skills I've tacked back against as I'm trying to be the leader who's on stage a little bit more. Mm-hmm. It's so embarrassing to me. I was on the front page of the Star Tribune business section. My daughter held it up and was like, "Your head's as big as mine." And I never read the whole article because I just cannot wrap my head around this idea that I have something that other people would want to hear more about.
I'm sure you've written up a lot, and there's positive things that are said about you. There's negative things that are said about you. You know, I think of like professional athletes who just kind of say, "I tune all of it out." How does that work for you?
It is so hard. I give professional athletes all the credit in the world in that vein, because not just social media, but the idea that there is so much anonymity in the world, that so many people anonymously feel they have the right to opine on everything. Mm-hmm. You have to, and the truth is, it's even true within the walls of Best Buy. Like most companies, we have our own kind of social media site. Mm-hmm. And every time there's a video or a picture, 100 employees are going to feel the need to comment on it.
Right.
I would lie if I didn't say it still doesn't hurt or sometimes rattle confidence. That would be a lie. And I don't totally tune it out because for me, I think it's important to try to understand, is there something I'm not seeing that some external person is? That being said, I work very hard to separate it from, again, who I am as a leader. And if you dwell on every single comment that you get anywhere, it's going to drive you crazy. I also believe in putting myself out there. So the other thing people do is just close themselves off occasionally. Right. I have a Facebook account, I have a Twitter account, and I am thoughtful about how I use those things, but they are my platform to be very clear about myself as a mom, right, and myself as a working mom. And then you got to be ready for what comes back. And it's not always pretty. But I believe more strongly in allowing a breadth of people to see me as a person than I do shutting down everything external in a way that just tries to protect my ego or my sense of worth.
Right. If we went back 20 years and you look at the path that you've taken, is there anything that... Well, I was going to say, is there anything you would have done differently? And I know people always say, well, no, everything happened for a reason and I'm here where I'm at, that kind of thing. But what I'm thinking of is maybe I don't know if it's a personal growth thing that you had to go through that you wish you didn't, or you know what I mean? Just something where you're like, if I could take it back.
Yeah.
Here's what I'd say to the 25-year-old me.
Genuinely, what I'd say to the 25-year-old me is don't get so upset about it. It's not actually something I would have done differently. Especially at 23 and 25, I was so worried about doing the job perfectly. I was so worried about, literally, I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and I held it all inside, and I really obsessed about it. And in fact, when I was named CFO, I sat down with one of my early mentors from Deloitte. And he looked at me at one point over lunch and he said, I got to be honest, I never thought you were going to make it. I was like, oh, thanks for the confidence. But his point...
He's not your sponsor.
Not anymore. But the point was he saw me carrying so much stress that he literally just didn't think I'd ever be able to find that separation between, again, who I am as a person and my life and what is required of big jobs. And if I could do anything, it would be literally to go back. I remember my sponsor at the time at one point sitting me down and saying, you're doing great. You need to make this look easy. And her point was, you don't have to make everything seem so hard or be so hard, because I was using that almost as a tool to say, look how hard I'm working, everyone.
Right.
And you should notice, and therefore I should get ahead. And instead, I would go back and just say, you got to learn to find some space here between how upset you get as a person and the role that you have. Because, trust me, when you start to get into a CFO role at a $40 billion company, if I'm worried about, our stock price dropped 5% 2 days ago, if I'm taking that personally every time, I'm never going to make it through this job.
So if you went forward now, because obviously you're fairly young to have achieved everything that you have. And I think there's a lot of people who are not necessarily in the same space, but they would say, oh my gosh, if I was this person, I'd probably do that job for 3 years and then I'd retire and go off in the sunset. You know what I mean? Or, but maybe if they're, I think a simple way of fulfillment is getting their fulfillment monetarily, right? Yet I feel like most leaders, their fulfillment is from so much more than what that would be. Yet you're at a pretty high level now. So if you went forward the next 20 years, is there another stratosphere? I mean, is there something else?
It's such a hard question. And it's particularly hard for me, back to the almost very first question you asked me. I never sat as a young person thinking, I'm going to be the CFO of a Fortune 100 company. That never crossed my mind, which is part of my frame on, I'm not exactly sure what's sitting out there 20 years from now. There's a few things I do know. I was just reading an article, and the average age of a CFO is 54, which for me is a good 10 years from now.
Sure.
And I was talking to my husband over dinner, and I was like, 10 more years. It's not that I don't want to work. To your point, I love working. The question is, how do you keep challenging yourself? And especially, again, in my case of stewardship, how am I going to put challenges in front of myself that keep helping me leave the world a better place? I don't know what that will look like. But I do know a couple of things. Both my husband and I lost a parent at a young age. It gives us a level of respect for how little time we might have left, and the idea of eking the most juice out of every moment we have, especially together. I mean, if there's anything I could tell you in 20 years, I'm still going to be married, and my kids are going to love me. And I know those things. The question is how I'm fulfilling on my promises in a way that allows me to have quality time with them, but also continue to leave my mark on the world. I don't know what it's going to look like yet. But I doubt that it looks like me sitting on a beach with my feet up, milking my paycheck.
Right.
I don't think that's going to be it. There'll be something, but I'm going to let that path kind of unfold for itself.
That sounds great. Thanks for being my guest today on the Ascent podcast.
It was fun.
I really appreciate how open and transparent you've been. You've been listening to my interview with Corie Berry, CFO of Best Buy, Fortune 100 company based in Richfield, Minnesota. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.